Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to our session. Today, we would like to discuss one of our published paper on Journal of English for Academic Purposes, named Bridging EAP and EMI, Professional Development for EAP Teachers in Chinese Higher Education. And I'm Jingwen Zhou, and my co-author Paolo is also here. Next page, please. That's our article is open access, so you can go read it whenever you want. Next page. So today we will briefly talk about the rationale and research questions, methodology and results and implications within the time frame. So hopefully you can get some interesting takeaway. Thank you. Next page. What is EMI? I think most people here know what is EMI, and the most cited definition of EMI is by Macarrow et al. However, such definition may require some contextualized adjustments in settings with dual content and language learning goals. Here, in certain contexts, language learning goals may not explicitly mentioned in the policy or regulations at the institutional level, but it is emphasized. So next page, please. So I will talk about the driving forces of EMI in China. It is motivated at different levels, as you can see. At the national level, EMI is introduced for realizing higher education institutional goal. At the institutional level, is for attracting research funding and promoting global university rankings. While at the individual level, students are encouraged, or let's say, required to improve their English proficiency and enhance career opportunities. Here in this table, we summarized the main characteristics of three main types of EMI provisions in China, namely EMI universities, EMI colleges, and EMI programs. And all EMI provision types share dual content and language learning goals. And across different types of EMI provisions, students experience similar language related challenges. And one possible way to address this challenge is the integration of EAP, English for academic purposes, support for students in those contexts. However, such integration has been hindered by challenges encountered by language teachers who are traditionally English for general purposes teachers, and they are now required to switch to EAP pedagogies. Next page, please. So we are talking about EAP practitioners' challenges. So you can see from these figures, we summarize a lot. So such as limited institutional support and funding, professional invisibility and marginalization compared to content teachers who are always the main stakeholders or who always lead the teaching in EMI context, and EAP expertise, which we will talk later, is often taken for granted by other stakeholders such as content teachers and also students. And as I said before, the difficulty in transitioning from EGP to EAP, and more specifically ESAP, like the discipline-specific content knowledge, And consequently, EAP practitioners may feel ill-prepared and feel lacking of access to appropriate professional development for them. Next page. So EAP teachers' professional development, what are required for EAP teachers specifically? So in our paper, we define EAP teachers PD as the career-long development of contextualized EAP-related skills and awareness, and beyond academic English skills. EAP expertise also covers discipline-specific discourses, communicative practices, and other skills. However, PD opportunities for EAP teachers in EMI contexts are generally lacking, and relevant PD research has mainly focused on content teachers. So in some little research exams, EAP teachers' professional development in EMI context. Next page, please. So that leads to two research questions. First, what kind of professional development opportunities are currently available for EAP teachers in EMI context in China? And the second one, what are EAP teachers and professional development leads perceptions of professional development opportunities for EAP teachers? And my co-author Paolo will introduce the rest, and then we too will answer any questions from you at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Jingwen. So now that you are acquainted with the background of our study, you can also see in this slide what is it that we actually did. So our study was part of a larger project in the Chinese EMI context. And in this table, you can see that we sampled 13 different institutions, 7 universities, 3 joint colleges, and 3 programs. From these 13 institutions, we were able to identify 12 different types of provisions of professional development, of which only one institution offered more than a simple format, and none at all were being offered by programs which relied entirely on external professional development. You can also see that some of the formats offered some sort of certification which was awarded to participants upon completion, but those were the minority, as you can see, only 4 of them. Here you can also see what is it that we actually did in terms of data collection. We employed a qualitative approach using multiple methods of data collection, but for this particular presentation, we are sticking to 2 methods. One of which is the analysis of the documents related to those professional development formats that we showed you in the previous slide. And the second one are semi-structured interviews, which were conducted with both EAP teachers from all provisions for a total of 20 participants, and with PD leads from universities and colleges, because as you saw in the previous slides, EMI programs had no internal professional development. You can also see some additional demographic information about our EAP practitioners here. But now we can move on to the results. If you have any further questions about the methodology, we can discuss it in the Q&A session. So regarding our first research question, as you see here, our first main finding was the fact that the vast majority of provisions were very generic. It was really a one-size-fits-all approach, and there was not much attention dedicated to EAP teachers specifically, with only one university providing something specifically for EAP teachers. Furthermore, we noticed that EMI universities tended to offer a more sophisticated approach to professional development compared to colleges. The second important finding concerns the kind of targets that these professional development provisions set, with most of them focusing on pedagogical skills development exclusively. So this would be things like academic language skills. But other targets were neglected, for example, intercultural communication skills and academic research skills, specialized content knowledge. So, for example, teaching the subject, the knowledge related to the specific subject taught by the EAP teachers, for example, engineering or biology. Now, we believe that this imbalance might be owing to the institutions not quite understanding what EAP teachers needed and what they were supposed to do in their teaching. And believe that this is a significant problem because the targets that appeared less frequently were the ones that were being most clearly requested by our interviewees, as you will see in the next slide, where we talk about the findings for the second research question. So our first major finding here was the fact that the different groups of teachers had different needs in terms of professional development. For example, teachers for English that were teaching English for specific academic purposes, they wanted more training in discipline specific knowledge. So, for example, biology teachers requested more training in biology specifically. Novice teachers also requested different types of training. Most of the training was workshop led, and what they really wanted was more pre-service induction and the opportunity to observe teachers teaching in class. While experienced teachers, they also requested more varied forms of professional development. We have thought of a possible solution for this in the establishment of tiered PD structures, but we will mention this more in the next slide. Another significant issue was the fact that EMI colleges and programs lacked resources in order to establish sustainable professional development. One possible solution that we contemplated was the establishment of collaborations between the EMI universities, which had more resources, and the other provision types in order to address this performance gap. And the final finding for this research question was the fact that teachers lacked motivation to engage with professional development because their efforts were not being acknowledged even inside of the institution. They suggested that some sort of formal accreditation would be necessary to for professional development to be incentivized. So let's move on to the final slide where we talk about, what are the takeaways from our studies. In summary, we found that the professional development afforded to EAP teachers was largely generic, workshop based, and not focusing really on the skills that were being requested by our participants. So we really suggest the establishment of a tiered structure of PD in order to address this issue. So you can see some of the suggestions right here. So, for example, more intercultural communication specifically for international EAP teachers, more specialized content knowledge training for English for specific academic purposes teachers. But in the end, this might prove challenging because it would require significant financial investments. Now, the most important takeaway from our project, I believe, is the fact that we will need research on the feasibility and the impact of the solutions that we proposed in our paper, especially for EMI contexts that are different from EMI universities. So this is definitely one area which we would like to investigate in the future. But this is really the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I will put the the references here for you to check in case you need to pause the video. And thank you so much for listening. We are open to your questions now.